When Miss Emily Grierson died, our whole town went to her funeral. The men through a sort of respectful affection for a fallen monument, the women mostly out of curiosity to see the inside of her house, which no one save an old manservant, a combined gardener and cook, had seen in at least 10 years. It was a big, squarish frame house that had once been white, decorated with cupolas and spires and scrolled balconies in the heavily lightsome style of the 70s, set on what had once been our most select street. But garages and cotton gins had encroached and obliterated even the august names of that neighborhood. Only Miss Emily's house was left, lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores. And now Miss Emily had gone to join the representatives of those august names where they lay in the cedar-bemused cemetery, among the ranked and anonymous graves of Union and Confederate soldiers who fell at the Battle of Jefferson.
Clicked. We've clicked it.
We've
Done
clicked
diddly
it.
clicked it.
Dim dang diddly clicked. This is a good way to start the show after months off. It's been months.
It's been a while.
Wow. Boy, oh boy. What's happened in the interim?
I graduated from college.
You are a true live adult.
Truly.
Yep. You are all set to conquer the world.
Still don't have a job.
Don't
or
have a
driver's
job.
license.
Does anyone out in listening land have a job for Willow? What are your qualifications? Give me a quick rundown.
I have a degree.
She has a degree, ladies and gentlemen. What more can you ask?
I've worked in a bookstore before.
That's true. You worked in a publishing house before.
Yeah, I volunteer.
You volunteer. Please give Willow work, preferably something she can do from home.
Yep.
Speaking of working from home, Emily. Hey everybody, it's
Emily.
It's Emily. It's the Adventures of Emily. We're back. We're back with the Dark Descent, and
we're going to keep being back with the Dark Descent until we finish the whole book now.
Because we have competitors over on a website who are also doing the Dark Descent. We're not going to call them out by name because I don't want you going over there and checking. But we did it first. We're the gods of the Dark Descent. We're covering the Dark Descent. Why? Because, and also, Guillermo del Toro, I guess. Hey, everybody, I'm Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And it's Del Toro
time.
It's Del Toro time, and we love a horror story.
We do.
And what's more horrific than sleeping with a dead guy?
You know what? Twilight would have some responses to that.
Had you ever read Faulkner before? Are you a Faulkner head?
I think I've read some of his stuff. I'm fairly certain I've read this story before.
Oh, really? Not
Yeah.
not Absalom?
No. I'm pretty sure I've read this story before because the ending was really familiar.
The ending's familiar. The ending's also a little... I'm glad that the story doesn't expect it to be a huge shock so much as, like, just gross like the rest of the story is.
Mm-hmm.
This is a gross story.
Yeah.
About gross people in a gross town.
Mm-hmm.
But have you ever read The Sound and the Fury?
No, I don't think so.
As I Lay Dying?
No.
Did you ever see the movie The Big Sleep or To Have and Have Not?
Nope.
Have you ever read any other story set in Yoknepatalfa County?
I don't think so.
Okay. So Falk, this is our first Falk. I think this is our only Faulkner. He was born in 18...
on the ground.
You what?
My book is on the ground.
That's okay, because I'm going to give a little bio on the boy here. Faulkner was born in 1897 in New Albany, Mississippi. He spent most of his life in the American South. He came from a prominent family with a history of military service and political involvement. His parents separated when he was really young. His mom died when he was a teenager. He dropped out of high school. I love this, though. He dropped out of high school and then attended the University of Mississippi because this was back when you could do that. You could just be like, but you know what? I'm smart and I have $50. Can I come to the, can I go to college? He tried to enlist in the Royal Canadian Air Force, but he was too small. He was a small. And then he worked in a bookstore. Huh?
Yeah?
Yes? And also
Yeah.
the post office, just like my parents. He married Estelle Oldham in 1929. She was his childhood sweetheart. He had a daughter and a drinking problem. And a
Who didn't have a drinking problem back then?
And who didn't have a daughter? And he went to Hollywood in the 30s and 40s. He worked on The Big Sleep, To Have and Have Not, The Long Hot Summer. And then in 1930, he wrote A Rose for Emily. It's part of the Yoknapatawap county cycle. I do not know how to say this. It's Yoknapatawpha county. And it's where a lot of his stories and novels are set. It's a fictionalized county in the American South that he used to explore the relationships of people, racial relationships, etc. in the Deep South. He was known for his Southern Gothic, which was the basically exploring the Deep South using like elements of Gothic writing. Faulkner. He had a lot of contemporaries: Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, James Joyce, Thomas Wolfe, John Steinbeck, but also a lot of female contemporaries: Eudora Welty, Flannery O'Connor, Catherine Ann Porter, Carson McCullers, and Zora Neale Hurston. They were all kind of kicking around in the same literary circles, a lot of them in the same Southern Gothic tradition. And then A Rose for Emily comes out, and it's one of his most anthologized short stories.
Why?
Because it's super studied and super influential in the development of short story writing and showing what you can do in a very, very short amount of time. Also, it was innovative for its use of time jumps. It's non-linear storytelling, like structuring a story in a non-linear fashion, but still ratcheting up the tension as you go. Like if you had told it in linear fashion, it wouldn't have the same impact as if you told it in non-linear fashion. And also for its use of first-person narration without naming who the narrator is, but also using the narration to like show you just how kind of gross this town is by having the narrator be as weird and gross as everyone else. Because you mentioned off mic that he uses the N-word quite a few times in this story. And that is, even though obviously he was writing at a time when, like, even if you were very progressive, your writings are going to come across as problematic. You can be assured that his use of certain words was consciously done in this story to illustrate who our narrators are and what kind of town we were living in, including its sort of incredibly dismissive attitude of the one black character in this story, who might be the most important character in the story. And that's my intro. Ta-da! Ta-da-ta-da-ta-da-ta. Welcome back to The Dark Descent.
I didn't get this story.
What didn't you get?
Well, I mean, I got the, like, gist of the story.
Yeah.
I don't see... I'm just not... Like, I didn't... It didn't thrill me.
It didn't thrill you, even though it only took you 10 minutes to read.
Yeah, I don't know. It felt obvious what was going to happen. I didn't really feel any tension because it felt obvious what was going to happen. And then it happened.
So this is a story that a lot of people, that gets studied a lot. Like a lot. Like every single line from this can be picked apart and used for a paper. If you ever, writers, students out there, Rose for Emily, you can choose any line from this story and write a thesis paper on it, including the title, A Rose for Emily, because guess what there isn't in this story?
A rose?
For Emily. Why is it even called A Rose for Emily is one of the big questions. What does it have to do with a rose? Any ideas?
He just liked the way the title sounded.
Okay, that's aesthetically, it could be the reason. Any other?
I mean, it's also about her funeral, right?
It is about her funeral.
And generally when people die, you place a rose on their casket.
There you go. And so why would you call the story that, is the question. Why do you put a rose on someone's casket? What is it, your final thing? Your final... Is it
like a well wish? I don't know.
Yeah. It's like a physical way of saying goodbye. You are putting something on the grave before you turn your back and say goodbye forever. And that's kind of what this story is. It's the rose for Emily at the end of her life. It's Faulkner or whoever is telling the story's way of being like, this is our final gesture. This is my final gesture. This is what I give to you. My final gesture
to you is to break into a room in your house and see your lover's, maybe your father's corpse in the bed.
It's not the father. It's not because they did take the father's corpse away, remember?
Right, yeah.
So
it's definitely her...
probably gay ex-boyfriend.
Yep.
The man who doesn't like hanging out with, only likes hanging out with the young men, doesn't think of himself as the Marion type.
He even says that he likes men.
Yeah. I like men, have no time for women, have no time for marriage. That's one of the things that gets written about a lot with this is, was her fiance ? Gay ? Many people say probably
yes.
so. In the only way that you could, well, I guess if they had come right out and said it, it wouldn't have made any sense from who's telling this. Like, no one at the time would say this guy was probably gay.
They kind of did just come out and say it.
But they leave it open enough that you could be like, I didn't accuse anybody of anything. I didn't say anything. I didn't say nothing.
He says he likes men.
Okay, but he doesn't say, but I liked kissing them. He doesn't say, like, I like touching them on the bottom. I like touching the underside of their thigh, like in the Bible.
Maybe I don't know. Maybe I just am really bad at thinking of when people are trying to be subtle, because that's just on the nose for me.
It is, but it's on the nose in the way that you have, what's the term I'm looking for? Plausible deniability. I think it leaves.
Is it?
Yes, because you could say, I just meant he liked men. He liked men, like he liked to hang around with men. Like, who doesn't like to hang around at the gymnasium? Who doesn't like to put on some little boy shorts and hang around with the men? Who doesn't
like hanging out with men?
Who doesn't like a little wrestling? A little wrestling on the ground.
You're immediately sus.
Who doesn't like getting all greased up and wrestling with the boys?
Maybe the narrator is gay.
Maybe Faulkner had some hidden proclivities or not so hidden proclivities. Who knows? Everyone was gay in the 30s. It was the gay 30s.
Everyone is gay now.
Everyone's gay. All my friends are gay.
All my friends are dead.
Is there something I should know about Illinois? Yeah,
no,
so...
I just referenced something, and I don't remember what. I referenced all my friends are dead, but I don't remember why.
So, the basics, this is, as you said before we started recording, super short story. It's like just a few pages long, but it crams a whole lot into it. It has 5
chapters, though.
Yes. 5 chapters, very short story. And it's about this woman, Emily, has died. She was kind of this... She lived to be like really old. She's kind of a fixture of the town. When she was a young woman, her father would chase all of her suitors away with a shotgun. Then he died and she didn't want to let go of the body till they dragged it out. As she got older, she was just kind of an institution. The town was trying to be kind to her, but they didn't want to give her charity because that would offend her. So they never charged her taxes. And that became a problem when the later generations grew up and started taking over the town and were like, why isn't that woman paying taxes? I love the way she doesn't pay taxes. She just refuses to until people go away.
Honestly, a mood.
It's that thing that like only old people can get away with. Because they're just like, you have to pay taxes. She's like, no. And they're like, well, but you have to. No, I don't pay taxes. Go talk to so-and-so. So-and-so's dead. Go talk to them. I don't pay taxes. Oh, okay. The sheriff says you have to pay taxes. I don't think he's the sheriff. Okay, bye.
Yep.
And then she just doesn't pay taxes anymore.
Hey, the IRS is so underfunded at this point, it probably would work.
It's probably for the best. They're going to build, the town has some construction going on. So this Yankee laborer shows up named Homer Barron. Homer. Huh? Maybe he's a little Homer-sexual?
Homosexual.
Homer shows up. They start dating. Everyone's thrilled that she's finally dating someone until they're not thrilled. They're just like, this is great. Then they're like, this has gone too far.
How dare she?
How dare.
Well, it's more like, this is great. And they're like, well, but it's never going to work out because she holds herself too highly.
Yeah. And he's an out-of-towner. He's a northerner. Even though, sadly, they seem to get along. They seem to be having a good time.
They might not even be dating.
Right. They spend a lot of time together. I mean, especially if he is gay, she just might be like this cool lady he met in town.
Yeah.
Who knows? And she just might be like, well, we know what she's like because they think they're getting married. She at least thinks they're getting married. She goes out and she buys him some new clothes, some cufflinks, a nice new collar. He goes out of town, comes back, and then he disappears and no one ever sees him again.
Yep.
And they're like,
she has these cousins, too.
Yeah. They're like, she should not be seeing this man. Let's call in her cousins from out of town to live with her and, like, chase him off. It doesn't work.
Because they're miserable, apparently.
Yeah, busybodies, biddies. They call in the biddies, the nosy cousins. And it doesn't work.
No.
The years go by. She teaches kids how to paint china.
Yep.
They stop.
Which is
sounds
a really weird detail to add.
Yeah, I don't know. So do some decoupage. It says, like, the kids would show up with magazine cutouts.
What do they call it again?
Decoupage. No,
what do they actually call it in the thing?
Like what they call, like, painting the china?
Yeah.
I didn't realize there was a word for it.
No, I meant, like, the wording they used.
You got me. Do you expect me to go... I'm going to talk while you search for what they call it.
What they call it in the story. Do they just call it painting China?
Yeah, I think so. Teaches kids how to paint China. How to paint China. Not Chinese calligraphy, but like actual physical China.
Yeah.
They teach, and then she stops, and then she becomes a total recluse. The only person you ever see coming in and out of her house is her black servant, who is called any number of epitaphs, as well as some of the other black laborers in town. So it's worth pointing out that throughout the story, Emily Grierson is her name, is referred to by the town and by the narrator as a lady. So she is definitely upper class, even though her family has no money. They used to be wealthy.
They're house poor, or whatever it's called.
Yes, very good. Yes. We've talked about that before.
Yeah.
Or house rich and dollar poor, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Like she has all this stuff, just no way to pay the bills. And some people have suggested, some writing has suggested that Homer himself may have been black because of the way they talk about him, but they talk around it because they don't want to insinuate anything in their writings. It's interesting. I read a couple of things where they're like, was Homer black? And it's like one of those questions. People are disapproving of it. They think that there's some writings not only of whether Homer was gay, but whether Emily may have been gay. There's all kinds of, like I said, everything's been written about this story. It is one of the most fascinating stories for people who have to write about stories. Especially, if you're studying the Southern Gothic, because you can kind of see where a lot of Southern Gothic traditions kind of fed out of this. But sexuality in this story, the repression of sexuality is a huge deal, especially with her father not letting her date anyone.
I want to know more about her father stuff, because it's super heavily like emphasized at the beginning and then it just sort of goes away.
Except for that weird crayon portrait of him.
Yeah.
What's a crayon portrait? Is that just like a black and white? Like crayon usually means just like a black crayon. Is it just like a charcoal sketch? I can't get my head around like what a crayon portrait looks like. In my head, it looks like a drawing that a 5-year-old did.
Yep.
Like, the crayon portrait of her dad that some kid did when he came to learn how to paint China. But she's never... So she has this relationship with Homer that's disapproved of. Yes.
The crayon portrait was a weak photographic image that provided the base for extensive handwork by an artist in charcoal or pastel. I
was kind of right about charcoal. So you would what? Take a picture, a bad photograph, and use it to like as a basis for a simple.
Yeah, I think it's like you take a. I'm looking at it right now. So basically, it looks like it was a bad like picture that you would take, and then you would go in and go through it with crayon because like photographic portraits were expensive AF.
And it ended up looking how good?
Really depends on the artist. Here, I'm just going to...
What did you look up? Just crayon portrait?
Yeah, I'm just gonna do a quick...
Screen share?
No, I'm gonna snip and send.
Oh, you're gonna send it to me. Ladies and gentlemen, do your own research. Look up crayon portrait.
Well, I looked up what is a crayon portrait.
1930s especially. But yeah, so it sounds like something you would do if you were on a budget, which really...
It looks like a lot of black families had them done.
Okay. So probably very common in the South among people who we want a picture of a loved one, but we don't have the cash to pay someone to come paint them. Maybe we have like a tintype or like a small photograph of them. I don't know. But yeah, that kind of makes a lot of sense. I'm looking at the pictures right now. One of these looks horrible.
I sent you the ones that I'm looking at.
It looks like a little squashy guy.
Yeah.
But the other one looks good. So yeah, it looks like you're gonna get what you paid for, and you're gonna get who I guess lives around your house. But that really, I don't know, that really illustrates that she would have probably a not great crayon portrait of her dad as like the only picture of him she has left. Just sitting out, and it's next to her casket at her funeral, is just to me very telling of like just kind of like the low budge life she was living there near the end. But she has this servant who's black, who is her only link to the outside world after a while. He goes and buys groceries and stuff. He never talks to anyone. And probably they say never talks to her because his voice is like raspy with disuse. When she finally, at one point after Homer disappears, people complain about this horrible odor coming from her house, but everyone's too embarrassed to talk to her about it. So in the middle of the night, a bunch of guys show up with like buckets of lime, and they just like spread lime around the house to make the odor go away. They even break into her basement and like sprinkle lime around just to kind of get the odor to go away. And the story is told in such a nonlinear fashion that anecdote pops up disjointedly enough that you may not necessarily put it together with Homer's disappearance.
No, I was confused because I thought it was her dad.
Exactly. You've got to
I thought she had like dragged her dad's corpse back to the house at some point.
Which I think is part of what makes the story kind of work, is like, you're like, oh, wait. And then at the end, if you kind of go back through it, you're like, wait, who's that line? Wait, her house did stink at one point, because after she dies, as you said, they break into her sealed up bedroom and find that she has been sleeping at times with the corpse of Homer, who's now so decayed, he's part of the bed. They're like, he's just melted into the sheet. Like, it's been decades, and it's like just the remnant, the tatters of his clothes, the bones, obviously, but like the flesh just kind of melted into the duvet, and the clothes that she bought for him, and like the cufflinks and the collar are all still laid out for their wedding, covered in like a thick layer of dust. It's really grody to the max, and they know that she was sleeping next to him because they find an indentation in the pillow in one of her gray hairs. So that's presented, and a lot of the adaptations of this kind of present that as like, and then we found the corpse and she was sleeping next to it, bum, bum, bum. Whereas the story itself presents it as it's the final image, but it's also just kind of like the last just sort of weird, pathetic, sad thing in this woman's life. It's like, it's horror in the sense that it's horrific. But no one ever even bothered to get to know this woman. Like, she immediately became a story and a source of pity, and like, no one talked to her. Everyone was like, well, you couldn't get to know her. She'd just kick you out. But it was also just like, no one seemed to try very hard. Like, once she stopped inviting kids over to learn to paint china, she was just kind of kicked to the curb as like a person.
I mean, she started inviting kids over to paint china after she killed the guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so, I mean, the way the nonlinear nature of the story, her relationship with her dad, one of the questions people ask is like, was her life tragic, or was she or does she consider herself to have come out on top at the end of this?
Do those two things not not work together?
Well, I guess like would she have considered her life a tragedy?
Would she have considered her life at all?
Yeah, you wonder. I don't know. She did. So at one point she goes out and she buys arsenic. And they're like, why are you buying the arsenic, Miss Emily? And she's like,
dead silence.
I'm gonna kill something. And they're like, legally, we have to ask you what you're buying all this arsenic for. She's like,
none of your business.
None of your business. And they're like, oh, okay, that's our Miss Emily. And then Homer disappears. Clearly, she killed Homer with the deadly rat poison.
Yeah, but they did write down on the box 4 rats.
4 rats.
You know who could have used that poison?
I'm trying to think of which story. Brown Jenkin.
The boy with the rats in the walls.
The Brown Jenkin. No, wait. No, that's Dreams of the Witch House. That is a rat, though. And I was also thinking of the rats in the grave. But yes, the rats in the walls also could have used some rat poison. One of the questions is one of these. I looked at a lot of like study guides, and one of them that made me laugh is some additional points to consider. The ambiguity of the story's ending and what it might suggest about Emily's fate. I'm like, I think
she's dead.
She died. I think she pretty much died. I didn't think the ending was that ambiguous. She was sleeping with a dead guy.
The question is, was she sleeping with a dead guy or sleeping with a dead guy?
And it's also like, what about the significance of death and decay? And I'm like, well, it's Southern Gothic story. It wouldn't be it without the death and decay. I was going to ask you, though, as someone who studied the Gothic, using this as an example of the Southern Gothic, what similarities do you see between, like, what elements of the Gothic do you see in this story?
The house.
In what way?
So, I mean, I've talked about it before, but houses are really important in Gothic writing. Like just the variety of rooms and like the way that like houses are described and kind of personified. So the description of the house in the beginning made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And the way that like it's almost, the story itself is almost an exploration, like it almost, the way it's written almost sort of mimics how houses work in Gothic, in my opinion. Because it jumps around so much and it's non-linear, and in a lot of Gothic, houses don't make a lot of sense. Like, they're not supposed to logically, like, necessarily work in the way that they're, like, written. And the way that this is written reminds me of that.
Almost like the sections of story are the rooms in a Gothic house. Yeah. Interesting. That's fascinating.
So, like, you go through them out of order, but in order, like, as well. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it still gets you to the end.
Yeah. And then the final, like, room scene was very Gothic. Like,
yeah,
the locked room at the back of the house with the bed in it and the...
When you also have, like, the silent servant.
Yeah.
And even, like, the person, like, the woman trapped in the house. Like,
yeah, this is very much a story about a house, even though it doesn't necessarily seem to be at first. I have to sneeze.
Here she goes. Goodness. Oh, my gosh.
Okay. Wait. Okay, yeah.
No,
yeah.
What?
No, you go.
No, I was gonna say that that it's so quick that it's easy to, if you go through it with a Gothic lens on, and it's just like, oh yeah, it is kind of like, the Gothic in microcosm. Just like let's tell the quickest tour through the world of Gothic literature.
Even the people outside of her like world, like the narrator and stuff, is very like, you know, when in like horror, when you have the people watching, like that, it feels very much like that. Like, this is told from the perspective of one of those people who watches from the outside. Like, if there's a like if it's a big manor on a hill in a traditional like Victorian Gothic, like, these people are the people in the village who the main character like walks through and like gets like eyed by. Yeah.
And it's also got that like a whole thing about the decay and the crumbling, like as the house decay, it stands for like the decay of the person's family, the end of the lineage.
Again, Gothic truly is stories about houses.
And Southern Gothic, of course, takes those elements and applies them to the southern states of America and all the problems inherent therein. So it incorporates slavery and racism and the antebellum South and fanning yourself like this and saying things like, the vines in the trees sure are coming in early this year, and drinking mint juleps. That's the Southern Gothic. If you want a great Southern Gothic novel, read the Blackwater Saga by Michael McDowell. Oh boy, it's very, very long and one of the best things I've ever read. But A Rose for Emily. How about that ambiguous ending?
Not very ambiguous.
Not very ambiguous. So
I do think that there's a lot of implications,
such as
her relationship with her father. Like, I think that there could be a lens for like abuse. And I think that like the attachment that she has with her father is very like telling. Yeah. And her isolation afterwards, and perhaps her relationship with a man who may not be actually available, that sort of seems to spiral into murder.
Right. Like, I was going to say, in this day and age, you know, Emily would have X, Y, and Z resources. But then I thought about it. I was like, in this day and age, she'd probably be just as isolated and forgotten about by her community. So, these people exist. They may not necessarily have the corpses of their dead loved ones in their house. But if the corpse stands for, you know, the fact that she just couldn't let her one shot at happiness ever go, which is really what it is. It's symbolically.
I suppose there is some ambiguity. Like, maybe maybe the arsenic truly was just for rats. And maybe she didn't actually kill him. Maybe he just died.
Yeah, maybe he fell on the poison.
Yeah,
with his mouth
maybe
open.
He fell on the rats.
She was holding the box of poison out like this, and he started yelling, and he was like, "Ah!" And then he tripped, and his mouth went right over the box. And she was like, "Homer in your big mouth."
Yeah, but again, we only have this lens of the people who judged and disliked her.
Yep. Yeah. And just and wanted her to be an object of fascination.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We don't have any actual, like...
She
It's
did
all
have the
hearsay.
body in the house, though.
She did.
Yes.
And I'm not saying she was completely right in the head.
Right.
I'm just saying that the fact that, A, they already disliked her because of who she was and, like, the family she was born into. B, the sort of implications and judgments about her aunt, like, going a little bit insane. And
Right.
C, like... the fact that they were so obsessed with this mysterious woman and her, like, house, like, it adds up to being maybe an unreliable narration of this woman and who she was.
I forgot. Yeah, they do talk about she had an aunt who went crazy.
Yeah.
And everyone kind of sees her through that lens.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so yeah, A Rose for Emily. It has been included in like almost every single like classic horror collection you can find. It's just everywhere. It's been, like I said, overanalyzed to the nth degree. If you're looking for analyses of A Rose for Emily, just close your eyes and put out your hand because they are there. But it was also adapted into a PBS movie. I got a movie.
What?
It was, what?
A what?
On PBS, public television, did an adaptation.
PBS Kids.
Yeah, PBS Kids. It was an episode of Booba. No.
No. I thought you were serious for a second, and I was like, well, I guess that adds to the surreal horror of that TV show.
In 1983, it was directed by Lyndon Chubbuck, a motion picture television commercial director and producer who died in 2021. Only died not terribly long ago. He directed the short film A Rose for Emily, 1983, starring Angelica Houston. So instead of her being a short, squat old woman, she was the tall, strikingly beautiful Angelica Houston. The old judge was played by John Carradine. It had Burt Williams in it. It had James Murtaugh in it. Just a bunch of Sally Kirkland in it playing gossip, and people seem to enjoy it. It was adapted into just a short 30-minute film that follows the story. I did not watch it because I could not get my hands on it, but if you're interested in digging it up, I'm sure it's out there. You might know other works from the director though, such as episodes of Alien Nation, episodes of Werewolf, episodes of Swamp Thing, Baywatch, Renegade, Thunder in Paradise, Due South, basically everything that came on television on Sunday afternoon, this guy directed an episode of. I'm kind of fascinated by his career, actually. Lyndon Chubbuck of the Lyndon Chubbucks. So, yeah, that's A Rose for Emily. Do you have anything else to add to the conversation?
I do not.
Good, because I think anything you could say about Rose for Emily has probably been said at this point.
Yep.
But Willow, what is the next story in the dark? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I did have one more thing to say, and that is our guy, Guillermo del Toro. This story's kind of right up his alley.
It's just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, besides the gothic and horror themes, there's the isolation and loneliness themes.
Yep.
There is the decay and deterioration themes.
Yeah.
As you could see in, I don't know, Crimson Peak or The Devil's Backbone.
This is a side story. This would be like a side story in Crimson Peak.
Right. Well, there's the psychological horror aspect, as you see in like The Orphanage, and the love and obsession with a former suitor or someone who is unobtainable that you are obsessed with. As you see in Crimson Peak and The Shape of Water. So this would make an interesting episode if they do a second season of Cabinet of Curiosities.
It would.
It'd probably get a little overblown, and I bet that corpse at the end would be pretty gross. Because we saw what they did with corpses. But you know, a solid 45-minute episode of Cabinet of Curiosities. Bring it on, Good Del Toro. Have someone fun direct it. Like, I don't know.
Someone.
The what's his face who did Hereditary?
I hate that movie.
Or Midsommar.
I like that movie.
Let's bring it. I would see an adaptation of A Rose for Emily directed by him, though.
Yeah.
He went to my college.
Nice.
That doesn't exist
anymore.
I don't remember his name. I'm blanking on it. I'm not going to look it up. But what is our next story?
How Love Came to Professor Gildea.
How Love Came to Professor Gildea, or Gildy, or Gilday. I'll tell you right off the bat, I'm almost finished with the story.
It's long.
but it's very good. It's a trip. I'm enjoying it immensely, so I can't wait to talk about it. Yeah, we are in the Medusa in the Shield, by the way, where darkness, horror is reflected back at us.
And after this one, we go to My Dear Emily.
Yes, more Emilys! More Emilys.
Actually, no, after this one, we go to a 3-page story, and then we go to My Dear Emily.
We love those 3-page stories. Would you say that our next story is a novelette?
Maybe.
Or is it a novella?
A novella, I think, would be slightly longer.
Okay, novelette then. Novelettes. We love them. They make the best 45-minute short films. So join us. Oh, who's it by?
Robert Hitchens.
Robert Hitchens is How Love Came to Professor Childea.
Oh, I think our story after that one is by good old Dick Math.
Dick Math? Dickie the Math Man? Well, stay tuned because we love a Dickie the Math Man story. Richard Matheson himself. But first you got to get through How Love Came to Professor Childea, which I'll look up before I talk about it next time.
It starts with a G.
But I promise everyone it will not be 2.5 months before our next episode.
No, it's going to be one day.
One day, yes. No, it's going to be really soon, so hold on to your butts. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining us. You can find us at wordpress.deltorotime.com. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter.
You can find us on YouTube.
Yep, I'm uploading all these Dark Descents onto YouTube at It's Phil. You can also find us on Twitter. You can find us on wherever the fresh meats are sold. Until
find us live in a few weeks.
Until then, don't poison your possibly ex-lover to death and sleep with his bones. That's gross.
Might not be your ex-lover if he's gay.
If he's gay, sleep with someone who consents and enjoys sleeping next to you themselves. That's a good thing to sleep next to. Or a body pillow, or all by yourself. Who cares? Do whatever floats your boat.
A cat, maybe?
A hat?
A cat.
Oh, I thought you said a hat.
No.
Or a warm hat. But
Fill your hat with beans, warm it up in the microwave, and you got a heating pad.
Or get a cat named Beans. Who knows?
There you go.
It's a good name for a cat. But if you learn nothing else from A Rose for Emily, if you learn nothing else from Mr. Faulkner, learn that you should only sleep next to the bones of someone who loves you back.
Yep.
Until then, I am Phil.
And I'm Willow.
And we'll see you when it's Del Toro time.